My name is Carol, I'm 71 years old, and my son and his new wife told me I wasn't special enough to be invited to their secret wedding. A wedding I had paid for. Before I tell you how I took back every penny in my own life, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It was a Tuesday morning, one of those perfect late summer days in Ohio where the sun feels warm on your hands through the kitchen window. I just poured my first cup of coffee, the smell filling the quiet house my late husband, Robert, and I had built from the ground up. My heart was full of that happy, bubbly excitement only a mother can feel. I was about to call my only son, Kevin, to finally nail down the plans for his wedding. I picked up the phone, my fingers dialing his number from memory. But it wasn't Kevin's voice that answered. It was Brittany, his fiancée. "Hi, Carol," she chirped, her voice as sweet and thin as fake honey. "Brittany, honey, good morning. I was just calling to talk to Kevin about the wedding plans. Have you two finally set a date?" I asked, a smile in my voice. I could already picture it, the flowers, the music, seeing my boy so happy. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a little chuckle. It wasn't a happy sound. It was condescending. "Oh, Carol," she said, and the way she drew out my name made my skin prickle. "We got married yesterday." The world went silent. The chirping birds outside, the hum of the refrigerator, everything just stopped. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. It suddenly felt like a block of ice in my hand. What did you say?" "We got married yesterday," she repeated, and this time I could practically hear the smirk in her voice. "It was just a small private thing. We only invited special people." Special people. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled back, leaning against the counter for support. My breath caught in my throat. Special people. And in that one shattering moment, a 3-year-long film reel played in my mind. I was the one who paid their $1,500 monthly rent for their trendy apartment in Cleveland every single month without fail. I was the one who drove my old station wagon to the furniture store and bought them their sofa, their dining table, the very bed they slept in, using the money Robert had left in his inheritance for me to live my final years in peace. I was the one who, just 2 weeks ago, had gone to the grocery store and filled their refrigerator because Kevin had called, saying things were a little tight. I had sacrificed my own plans for a small trip to Florida with my friends. "I can't, girls," I'd told them. "Kevin and Brittany really need my help right now." Hanging in my closet, still in its plastic wrap, was a pale blue dress. It cost me $300. It was my mother of the groom dress. I had stood in front of the mirror, imagining how proud I would look in the wedding photos. Photos I would now never be in. Special people. The phone was still pressed to my ear. I could hear Brittany breathing, waiting for my reaction, probably enjoying my stunned silence. I couldn't speak. I couldn't form a word. All I could see was that beautiful, useless blue dress hanging in my closet. It wasn't just a dress anymore. It was a monument to my own foolishness. A silent mockery of a mother's unconditional love. For 3 years I had poured my heart, my soul, and nearly every dollar from my savings account into their lives. I did it because Kevin was my world. I did it because I thought that's what a good mother does. You give and you give and you keep on giving. You ensure your child's happiness, no matter the cost to yourself. But as I stood there shaking in my own kitchen, a cold, hard truth settled over me. I wasn't their mother. I wasn't their beloved family member. I was their benefactor, their safety net, their personal bank. And my services, it seemed, were no longer required for the special moments, only for the bills. "Carol? Are you still there?" Brittany's voice cut through the fog in my head, laced with impatience. I opened my mouth, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. My throat felt like it was full of sand. I had so many questions. Why? How could you? What did I do wrong? But none of them seemed to matter in the face of those 4 brutal words. Only special people. I finally managed to whisper, I have to go," and I hung up the phone before she could say another word. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. I just stood there, staring at the wall, the pattern of the wallpaper swimming before my eyes. My life's work, my greatest love, my only son, had just held a knife to my heart, and his wife had twisted it with a smile. But what I didn't know in that moment, what I couldn't possibly have imagined, was that this was just the beginning. The wedding was not the ultimate betrayal. It was just the opening act for a war they were about to declare on me. And as I slowly turned and walked towards my closet to look at that pale blue dress, a new cold feeling began to spread through my veins. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. Something harder. Something that was about to change everything. That cold, hard feeling stayed with me as I walked, almost in a trance, from the kitchen to my small home office. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse, but I had to see. I had to know. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing in the dim room, and typed Facebook into the search bar. I rarely used it, only to see pictures of my friends' grandchildren, but I knew Brittany lived her life on it. Her profile was public. And there it was. The very first post was a photo album, uploaded just last night. The title, written in a bubbly cursive font, read, "The best day of our lives. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson." My breath hitched. I clicked. The first photo was of Kevin and Brittany beaming. He was in a sharp tuxedo, and she was radiant in a flowing white gown, intricate with lace and beading. It was a beautiful dress. A dress that probably cost a fortune. A dress I now realized I had helped buy with the $1.00 I gave her last month for personal expenses. My money draped over the woman who had just told me I wasn't special. The irony was so thick I felt like I was choking on it. I kept scrolling, each picture a fresh stab to my heart. There was Brittany with her parents, her father looking so proud, his arm around his daughter. There was her mother, dabbing a tear from her eye. There were her siblings, all of them, raising glasses of champagne in a toast. I saw friends I didn't recognize laughing, dancing at what looked like a beautiful, expensive venue by a lake. Everyone was there. Everyone who was special. My son, my Kevin, was in almost every picture smiling. But it wasn't his usual genuine smile. It was a tight, strained look I recognized. The look he got when he was trying to please Brittany. He was looking at her in every photo, never at the camera. It was like he was a prop in her perfect day. My boy, the one I taught to ride a bike and helped with his homework, had become an accessory. I felt a wave of nausea. I closed the laptop, the click echoing in the silent room. The anger that had been a small, cold stone in my stomach now began to burn, spreading through my chest like a wildfire. This wasn't a last-minute, intimate affair. This was a planned, celebrated event. They hadn't forgotten to invite me. They had chosen not to. The rage gave me a strange sense of clarity. I went back to my desk, but this time I didn't open the laptop. I pulled out a pen and a notepad from the drawer, the same one I used to keep my household budget. I was going to do a different kind of accounting now, an accounting of my own blindness. I started with the biggest number, the rent. I wrote it down, my handwriting sharp and angry. $1,500 x 36 months. My pen moved across the page. $54,000. Just seeing the number written down made my stomach lurch. $54,000. Enough for a down payment on a small house. Enough for me to have traveled the world. Next, I added the monthly support. The groceries, the utility bills I'd covered, the just a little something to help you guys out checks. I estimated a conservative $500 a month. $500 x 36 months. That was another $18,000. Then came the bigger things. The furniture. $4,000. The down payment on their car. A loan they swore they'd pay back but never did. $5,000. The endless emergencies, the car repair, the vet bill for their cat, Brittany's essential dental work. I estimated at least $6,000 over the 3 years. And the gifts. Birthdays, Christmases, anniversaries. Always lavish because I wanted them to have the best. Another $5,000, easily. I drew a line under the column of numbers. My hand was steady now. The shaking had stopped, replaced by an icy resolve. I added it all up. Once then twice to be sure. The final number stared back at me from the page. $82,000. $82,000. It wasn't just money. It was my security. It was the nest egg Robert and I had painstakingly built. It was the fruit of his life's work and my own careful saving. It was supposed to be my peace of mind in my old age. Instead, I had handed it over, piece by piece, to 2 ungrateful children who saw me as nothing more than a line of credit. I stared at that number, and for the first time I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel hurt. I felt nothing but a cold, clarifying rage. The loving, doting, endlessly giving mother was gone, and in her place was a woman who had just seen the receipt for her own destruction. The flow of money had stopped. The bank of Mom was officially closed, and I knew with every fiber of my being, they would soon feel the consequences. The silence from their end lasted exactly 1 week. I knew it would. I'd been counting the days. Rent is always due on the first of the month. My automatic transfer was always there on the last day of the previous month. Like clockwork. This time the 31st came and went and I did nothing. I went to my gardening club, had lunch with a friend, and slept more soundly than I had in years. The peace was delicious. The call came on the 7th. A Friday afternoon. I was repotting an orchid when my phone buzzed on the counter. I saw Brittany's name and a small grim smile touched my lips. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, wiping the soil from my hands. "Hello," I said, my voice calm and even. "Carol." The panic in her voice was immediate, thinly veiled by a layer of forced cheerfulness. "Hi. How are you?" "I'm fine, Brittany. What can I do for you?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. We were past that. There was a nervous little laugh. "Well, it's just a little thing. I think you might have forgotten something. The rent money? It's a week overdue, and the landlord is being a real jerk about it. He's threatening us with an eviction notice." Her voice cracked on the last 2 words, a calculated bit of drama. I paused, letting the silence stretch out. I could almost hear her heart pounding through the phone. I pictured her pacing their living room, my living room really, since I'd paid for everything in it. "Oh," I finally said, my tone flat. "I didn't forget." You didn't?" The confusion in her voice was genuine. This was not in her script. "But you always transfer it. What happened? Is everything okay with your bank?" "My bank is fine, Brittany. My finances are perfectly in order." I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. It was the first time in 3 years I held all the power. "I've just decided to make some changes to my budget." "Changes? What kind of changes?" she asked, her voice rising in pitch. "Carol, this isn't a good time for changes. We could be kicked out onto the street. Don't you care?" And there it was. The guilt trip. The classic manipulation that had worked on me for years. But the woman she was talking to was not the same woman from a week ago. I leaned against the counter, looking at the beautiful orchid in my hands. "Brittany, honey," I said, my voice dropping to a low, calm, and utterly unshakable tone. "Didn't I tell you? I've decided I'm only helping special people from now on." The silence on the other end was so complete, so profound, it was like I had hung up. I could hear the faint buzz of the line. For a full 10 seconds there was nothing. For the first time in our relationship, Brittany was speechless. But we are special to you," she finally stammered, her voice a desperate, pleading whine. It was the voice she used when she wanted something expensive. "You're like a second mom to me. You always said that." I almost laughed out loud. The audacity was breathtaking. "That was before I realized my role had a job description, Brittany. It seems my main function was to sign checks. And I've decided to retire from that position. Effective immediately." "You can't do this to us," she shrieked, the mask of sweetness completely gone, revealing the ugly, grasping entitlement underneath. "Kevin is your son. You have a responsibility." "My responsibility to Kevin ended when he became a 35-year-old man," I said calmly. "My mistake was treating him like a child for 3 years too long. You and your husband are adults. It's time you learn to pay your own bills." "The landlord," she started, her voice trembling with rage now, not fear. "Is your problem," I finished for her. "Not mine. Goodbye, Brittany." I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I placed it gently back on its cradle. My hands weren't shaking. My heart was beating steadily. The silence that filled my house wasn't lonely. It was powerful. It was the sound of chains breaking. But I was naive. I thought that was the end of a painful chapter. In reality, I had just fired the first shot in a war I never wanted. And my enemy, I would soon discover, had no rules of engagement. The battle had only just begun. For a few days, an unnerving quiet settled over my life. No calls, no texts. It was the calm before the storm. And the storm broke on a Thursday afternoon. I was pulling weeds in my front garden when Kevin's car, The one I'd helped him buy, screeched to a halt at the curb. Brittany was in the passenger seat, her face a mask of thunder. But they weren't alone. A man in an expensive gray suit got out of the back seat. He had slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked like a shark, and I was the swimmer he'd just spotted. Before I could even stand up, they were marching up my walkway. Kevin fumbled with a key. My key. The emergency spare I'd given him years ago, just in case. The thought that he would use it to invade my home made my blood run cold. They let themselves in without so much as a knock. I dropped my trowel, soil clinging to my hands, and followed them inside. The scene that greeted me in my own dining room was surreal. Kevin was pacing nervously by the window, refusing to look at me. Brittany stood with her arms crossed, glaring. And the shark in the suit was shuffling through a stack of my personal mail on my dining table. My bank statements. My utility bills. What is the meaning of this? My voice was low, but it cut through the tension in the room. What are you doing in my house? All three of them turned to look at me as if I were the intruder. Brittany spoke first, her voice dripping with false concern. Carol, thank God you're here. We were so worried. This is Mr. Vance. He's our attorney. We needed to talk to you about your situation. My situation? I repeated, my gaze fixed on the stranger touching my private documents. I'm doing just fine. The only situation I see here is 3 people trespassing in my home. The lawyer, Mr. Vance, stepped forward, extending a smooth, manicured hand which I ignored. Mrs. Anderson, he began, his voice condescendingly calm. Your children have retained my services. They are deeply concerned about your recent erratic behavior, your sudden decision to cut off financial support, your refusal to answer their calls. These are significant red flags. Red flags. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You mean the red flag of a 71-year-old woman deciding her retirement fund isn't a community chest for 2 able-bodied adults? That's not erratic, Mr. Vance. That's called sanity. Kevin finally spoke, his voice weak. Mom, we're just worried. You're not acting like yourself. You're right, Kevin, I'm not. I shot back, turning my glare on him. For the first time in years, I'm acting like myself. Not your personal ATM. Mr. Vance cleared his throat, pulling a sheaf of papers from his leather briefcase. He slid them across the table towards me. Your children believe that you may be under some undue stress, perhaps even suffering from a condition that is impairing your judgment. They feel it would be in your best interest to allow them to manage your financial affairs until you are feeling more stable. I looked down at the papers. The heading was printed in bold, black letters. Durable power of attorney. I felt the floor drop out from under me. This wasn't just a visit. It wasn't just a desperate plea for money. This was a coup. A calculated, legal maneuver to seize control of everything I had. They had come here with a lawyer to try and have me declared mentally incompetent. The woman who had told me I wasn't special enough for her wedding now stood in my house, trying to strip me of my rights, my autonomy, my very personhood. The audacity of it was breathtaking. They weren't just after my money anymore. They were after my life. Brittany stepped closer, attempting a gentle tone. Carol, it's just to help. To take the pressure off you. We love you. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. That was the final straw. Her feigned love was more insulting than her open greed. I picked up the power of attorney documents. The paper felt slick and venomous in my hands. I looked from Brittany's fake, concerned face to Kevin's cowardly, averted gaze, and then to the smug, confident smile of their lawyer. They thought they had me cornered. They thought the old woman would be scared, confused, and would just sign her life away. They had no idea who they were dealing with now. With deliberate slowness, I took the stack of papers. I looked directly into Kevin's eyes, hoping to see a flicker of the son I once knew, but there was nothing. Just a hollow shell. I ripped the documents in half, the sound tearing through the silent room. Then I ripped them again. And again. Until all that was left was a pile of confetti on my polished dining table. Get out, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the force of a lifetime of suppressed anger. Get out of my house. Brittany's face contorted with rage. The mask was gone. You can't do this. You'll regret this, you crazy old woman. Get out. Now, I repeated, pointing a trembling finger towards the door. The look in Brittany's eyes was no longer just greed. It was pure hatred. That moment I knew. I hadn't just made an enemy. I had just declared war. After they stormed out, slamming the door behind them, the house fell into a profound silence. But it wasn't a peaceful silence this time. It was menacing. I knew that ripping up those papers wasn't an end, but an escalation. I was right. Their next attack was far more insidious, more cunning than a frontal assault. Brittany, I learned, was a master of a different kind of warfare. She didn't come after my assets. She came after my world. My world was small, but it was mine. It revolved around my garden, my home, and the community center just a few blocks away. I'd been a member there for 15 years. We had potlucks, book clubs, and a weekly coffee morning. These women were my friends, my support system since Robert passed. It was where I felt I belonged. And that's where Brittany struck. It was my friend, Mrs. Gable, who told me. She pulled me aside after our book club meeting the following Tuesday. Her face was etched with concern. "Carol, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low. "Brittany was here yesterday, during the knitting circle." My heart sank. What did she want? Mrs. Gable took a deep breath. She put on quite a show, crying, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She told everyone how worried she and Kevin are about you. She said you've been having episodes, that you've become paranoid and hostile, and that you threw them out of your house for no reason. I felt the blood drain from my face. I could picture it perfectly. Brittany, the grieving, loving daughter-in-law, playing the victim for a captive audience of my oldest friends. "She told them you're being manipulated," Mrs. Gable continued, her eyes flashing with anger on my behalf. "She said some new people have gotten into your head and are trying to turn you against your family to get your money. She made it sound like you've completely lost your mind." The poison spread quickly. The next coffee morning I felt it. The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere when I walked in. The conversations that quieted. The friends who suddenly found their coffee cups incredibly interesting, avoiding my gaze. Joan, a woman I'd shared recipes with for a decade, gave me a tight, pitying smile and turned away. The usual comfortable chatter was replaced by strained pleasantries. I was no longer Carol, their friend. I was poor Carol, the confused old woman who was losing her grip. Brittany's strategy was diabolical. She was methodically dismantling my support system, isolating me. She was trying to turn her lies into a self-fulfilling prophecy. If everyone treated me like I was incompetent and alone, eventually I might start to feel that way. She wasn't just building a case for a future court battle. She was trying to break my spirit before we even got there. The humiliation was immense. Walking into that room, a place that had always been a sanctuary, and feeling like an outcast was a new kind of pain. Now, you can see how devious they were. This wasn't about a simple inheritance dispute or a family squabble over money. This was a campaign to utterly destroy me, to erase my credibility, to strip me of my friends and my dignity. And if you think this was their lowest point, you're mistaken. Listen to what they did next, because this is where things went from cruel to truly evil. The loneliness was the worst part. I started making excuses to skip the coffee mornings. The silence in my house, once a symbol of freedom, started to feel like a prison. They were winning. They were making me the person they claimed I was. I would sit by the window watching the world go on without me, feeling utterly and completely alone. For a few dark days I actually wondered if they were right. Was I going crazy? Was I paranoid? It was in that moment of despair that the doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer it. I didn't want to see another pitying face. But it rang again, persistent. I dragged myself to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Susan, my next-door neighbor for the past 20 years. We'd always been friendly in a wave-across-the-driveway kind of way, but never close. She was holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. I opened the door a crack. "Susan." She gave me a warm, no-nonsense smile. "Carol," she said, her voice firm. "I've been hearing the gossip from the center, and I want you to know I don't believe a word of it. You're one of the sanest women I know." She pushed the plate of cookies into my hands. "Now, are you going to let me in? Or are we going to stand here on the porch? I think it's time you told me what's really going on." Letting Susan into my house that day was like opening a window in a stuffy, dark room. I poured out the whole story. The secret wedding, the $82,000, the ambush with the lawyer, the vicious rumors. She listened patiently, nodding, her expression growing harder with every detail. When I finished, she didn't offer pity. She offered a plan. "My sister is a paralegal," she said, her voice full of purpose. "She worked for 25 years for one of the best elder law attorneys in Cleveland. His name is David Davies. He deals with monsters like your son and daughter-in-law for a living. You're calling him first thing tomorrow morning." That phone call changed everything. The moment I started speaking with Mr. Davies, I felt a weight lift. He wasn't shocked by my story. He was grimly familiar with it. "Carol," he said, his voice calm and reassuring, "what you are describing is a textbook case of elder financial abuse, and their subsequent actions are witness intimidation and defamation. We are going to fight this, and we are going to win." For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a victim. I was a client. I had a professional on my side. Our first meeting was a strategy session. Mr. Davies laid out a plan not for defense, but for offense. "The best defense is a fortified position," he explained. "We are going to make you untouchable." The very next day, the fortification began. Step 1 was changing the locks. I called a 24-hour locksmith and watched as he replaced every single lock on my doors. The sound of the drill was the sound of me reclaiming my territory. When he handed me the new set of keys, they felt different in my hand. They weren't just metal. They were a symbol of my restored sovereignty. Kevin's key was now useless. Step 2 was surveillance. On Susan's recommendation, I hired a security company. They installed a state-of-the-art system with cameras covering every entrance to my property. The technician showed me how to view the feed on my phone. Now I could see who was at my door without even getting up. The sense of security it gave me was immense. The paranoia Brittany accused me of was now a practical technological shield. Step 3 was securing my finances. Mr. Davies came with me to the bank. We closed my old accounts and opened new ones at a different branch. We set up alerts for any transaction over $50. We went through my assets and put them into a more secure trust, one that would be ironclad against any legal challenges to my competency. The bank manager, who had seen my accounts dwindle for years from the transfers to Kevin, shook my hand. "I'm glad to see you taking care of yourself, Mrs. Anderson," he said with genuine warmth. While Mr. Davies handled the legal fortifications, Susan handled the social ones. She and Mrs. Gable became my personal guard. They went back to the community center and they didn't whisper, they spoke out. They told everyone that I was the victim of a malicious campaign by my greedy children. They presented the facts calmly and rationally. Not everyone believed them at first, but a seed of doubt was planted against Brittany's narrative. My true friends started to rally around me, calling me, inviting me for walks, making sure I was never truly alone. I was building a fortress brick by brick. A legal wall, a technological wall, and a social wall. I was taking back control, one deliberate action at a time. The fear that had been my constant companion started to recede, replaced by a growing sense of empowerment. I was no longer the sad, confused old woman they wanted me to be. I was the commander of my own fortress. I was ready for their next assault, but I was still naive. I had fortified myself against attacks I could anticipate. I had no idea they would find a way to strike at the one part of my life I thought was untouchable. The one thing so precious and innocent it had never occurred to me I would need to defend it. The one soft spot in my newly built fortress, the one unguarded part of my heart, was a 14-year-old golden retriever with a graying muzzle and arthritic hips. His name was Buddy. Robert and I had gotten him as a puppy, just a bundle of golden fur and clumsy paws. After Robert's death, Buddy had been my shadow, my confidant, the warm, breathing presence in a silent house. He was the last living piece of my life with my husband, and that's what they came for next. It happened on a crisp autumn morning. I was in the kitchen mixing up Buddy's special food, a soft concoction with his joint supplements mashed in, when I saw the white van pull up. It had the official seal of the county on the side. Animal control. My blood turned to ice. I had a sudden terrifying premonition. I stood frozen as two uniformed officers walked up my driveway. One of them, a stern-looking woman, knocked firmly on the door. My hand trembled as I opened it. "Can I help you?" "Ma'am, are you Carol Anderson?" she asked, not unkindly. We've received an anonymous complaint regarding the welfare of an animal at this residence. We need to perform a wellness check. A complaint? I stammered, my mind reeling. About Buddy? But he's perfectly fine. We have to check it out, ma'am. It's the law. The other officer, a younger man, said gently. The report claims you're neglecting an elderly dog, that he's malnourished and not receiving proper medical care. The cruelty of it stole my breath. This was Brittany's handiwork. I could feel it. This was lower than the lies, lower than the attempted theft. This was an act of pure, calculated evil. They were using my love for Buddy, my most vulnerable point, as a weapon against me. They were trying to create an official record that I was an unfit caregiver, not just for myself but for the most helpless being in my life. I felt a surge of protective rage. Come in, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Come in and see for yourselves how neglected he is. I led them through the house to the back porch, where Buddy was asleep in his orthopedic bed, sunlight warming his old bones. He lifted his head slowly as we approached, his tail giving a weak thump against the cushion. The female officer knelt down, her expression softening instantly. She ran a hand over his coat, checked his ears, looked at his eyes. He looks like a sweet old man, she said. He is, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. I showed them everything. His shelf in the pantry, lined with high-quality senior dog food. His array of medications from the vet, pain relief for his arthritis, supplements for his heart. I even had his veterinary records in a file, which I handed to them. It documented his regular checkups, his vaccinations, his entire life of being cherished and cared for. The young officer looked through the file. Ma'am, he said, looking up at me with apologetic eyes. This dog is clearly very well looked after. I have no idea why anyone would file a report like this. It's a waste of our time and a terrible thing to do to a pet owner. The stern woman stood up. The complaint is unfounded, she stated officially. We're very sorry to have bothered you, Mrs. Anderson. You have a beautiful old dog here. They left and their van drove away, leaving silence in its wake. But the violation lingered in the air. They had sent strangers into my home to judge my love for my dog. They had tried to turn my final precious years with him into a legal liability. As the van disappeared down the street, the strength that had held me together finally crumbled. I sank to my knees beside Buddy's bed. He rested his heavy head on my lap, as if he understood. I wrapped my arms around his warm body, buried my face in his soft fur, and I wept. I cried for my sweet, innocent dog, who had been used as a pawn in their disgusting game. I cried for Robert, who would have been horrified. And I cried for myself, for the mother who had raised a son capable of such casual cruelty. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. This was no longer about my money or my house. This was about my soul. And as I held my old loyal friend, I made a silent vow. I would not let them win. I would fight them with everything I had left. The failure of the animal control gambit only seemed to make them more desperate. Like cornered rats, they bit harder. 2 days later, there was another official-looking car outside my house, but this one was from the County Department of Social Services. A woman in a drab pantsuit, carrying a clipboard like a shield, knocked on my newly fortified door. Her name was Ms. Davies, and she was from Adult Protective Services. This time I was prepared. I saw her coming on my security camera feed, and before I even opened the door, I had my lawyer on the phone. "They're here, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice steady. "APS is at my door. Do not let her in until I get there, Carol," he instructed. "Stall her. I'm 10 minutes away." I opened the door and faced the woman. "Good morning," I said politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Mrs. Carol Anderson," she said, her tone all business. "We've received a report from concerned family members that you may be at risk and are in need of our services." It was the same script, a different agency. I could almost hear Brittany coaching them. "I see," I said, blocking the doorway. "My attorney is on his way. I prefer to wait for him before we discuss anything." Ms. Davies looked taken aback. "Ma'am, this isn't a legal matter, it's a wellness check. A refusal to cooperate could be interpreted as a sign that you are indeed hiding something, or are not capable of making sound decisions." The threat was clear. It was a classic catch-22. If I spoke to her alone, they could twist my words. If I refused, it was proof of my incompetence. I'm not refusing, I said calmly. I'm simply exercising my right to have counsel present. He'll be here in a few minutes. You're welcome to wait on the porch. Her lips thinned, but she knew I was within my rights. She stood there, tapping her pen impatiently on her clipboard as I waited. The minutes crawled by. Just as I saw Mr. Davies's car pull into the driveway, I felt a wave of relief. The cavalry had arrived. Mr. Davies was a whirlwind of professional efficiency. He introduced himself, checked Ms. Davies's credentials, and then ushered us all into the living room, taking charge of the situation immediately. Ms. Davies, he began, my client is happy to cooperate, but first I'd like to provide you with some context. He opened his briefcase and laid out a series of documents on the coffee table. This, he said, tapping a stack of bank statements, is documentation of over $80,000 in funds my client has given to the concerned family members over the past 3 years. He then slid over a printed-out report. This is the official report from County Animal Control from 2 days ago, dismissing a malicious and unfounded claim of animal neglect, filed anonymously by the same concerned family members. He continued, laying out sworn affidavits from Susan and Mrs. Gable about the slander campaign at the community center. He presented the shredded remains of the power of attorney they had tried to force on me. It was a mountain of evidence, a clear, damning narrative of greed, manipulation, and harassment. So you see, Ms. Davies, Mr. Davies concluded, his voice sharp as glass, the only risk my client is under is from the very people who called you. This isn't a wellness check. This is the latest move in a systematic campaign of intimidation, designed to force a 71-year-old woman to sign over her assets. The social worker was stunned into silence. She looked from the pile of evidence to me, then back again. The narrative she had been fed was crumbling before her eyes. She had walked in here expecting to find a confused, paranoid old woman. Instead, she found a well-prepared, well-represented woman who was the victim of a targeted attack. She cleared her throat, her professional demeanor shaken. Mrs. Anderson, she said, speaking to me directly for the first time with a shred of respect. Based on this documentation, and my conversation with you now, I see no evidence that you are in need of our services. In fact, it seems you are handling a very difficult situation with remarkable clarity. She packed up her clipboard, her mission clearly aborted. I will be closing this case as unfounded. I am sorry for the intrusion. As she left, Mr. Davies and I stood in the silent living room. They're getting desperate, Carol, he said grimly. They failed with the lawyer, they failed with the rumors, they failed with animal control, and now they failed with APS. There's only one move left for them to make. I knew what he was going to say before he said it. They're going to take you to court, he said. They're going to formally petition a judge to have you declared incompetent and strip you of your rights. Get ready, Carol. The real fight is about to begin. The official court summons arrived a week later. It felt heavy in my hands, a formal declaration of war from my own flesh and blood. The words swam before my eyes. In the matter of the conservatorship of Carol Anderson, they were asking a judge to make my son my legal guardian, to give him total control over my finances, my property, and my life. They wanted to make me a non-person, a ward of the son I had raised. The day of the trial, I woke before dawn. I chose my outfit with the care of a general preparing for battle. Not a sad black dress of a victim, but a smart navy blue suit. It was the suit I used to wear for important meetings when I worked as an office manager before I retired. It was my armor. Walking into the courthouse was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Mr. Davies was by my side, a calm, steady presence. We saw them across the marble hallway. Kevin, looking pale and uncomfortable in a suit that was too tight for him, and Brittany, dressed in somber black, a look of pious grief on her face, as if she were attending my funeral. In a way she was. She was hoping to witness the death of my freedom. Their lawyer, Mr. Vance, was with them, whispering instructions. He gave us a confident nod, the look of a predator who smells blood. Inside the courtroom the air was heavy and still. I sat at the table with Mr. Davies, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. Mr. Vance began his opening statement. His voice was smooth and persuasive. He painted a masterful picture for the judge. A heartbreaking story of a beloved mother and grandmother-to-be suddenly descending into a fog of paranoia and confusion. He spoke of her loving family, who only wanted to protect her from herself and from opportunistic new influences. He made my empowerment sound like madness, my self-preservation sound like a symptom of dementia. He was good. He was very, very good. Then they called their first witness, Brittany. She walked to the stand clutching a tissue. Her performance was breathtaking. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke of her deep love and concern for me. She was like a second mother to me, she sobbed, her voice breaking. We were so close. And then she just changed overnight. She became so angry, so suspicious. She installed all those cameras. She accused us of terrible things. She wouldn't even answer the phone. It's been devastating to watch her mental decline. She detailed how I had erratically cut them off, throwing their lives into chaos. She conveniently left out the part about the secret wedding. Under her telling, they were the victims of my sudden, inexplicable cruelty. Then it was Kevin's turn. Watching my son walk to that stand, place his hand on the Bible, and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. That was a pain I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And then he began to lie. His voice was soft, full of feigned sadness. My mom has always been the most generous person I know, he began. But in the last few months she's not the same person. She's forgetful, she gets confused. We believe she's being manipulated by her neighbor. By this lawyer? People who are taking advantage of her. He looked at the judge with wide, earnest eyes. Your Honor, I'm scared for her. We are not doing this for money. The money doesn't matter. We're doing this to protect my mother. The lie was so bald-faced, so monstrous, that it almost took my breath away. Their final witness was my neighbor from across the street, Mark. A perpetually grumpy man who I'd had minor disagreements with over the years about his dog barking or his overgrown hedges. They had clearly gotten to him. He took the stand and spoke with relish about my crazy behavior. She put up cameras like it's the CIA, he declared. Always having strangers coming and going at all hours, he said, referring to my friends from the community center. And I saw her myself, yelling at her own family in the street. He was describing the day I had thrown them out of my house after the ambush, twisting my act of self-defense into an unhinged public outburst. By the time Mr. Vance rested his case, the air in the courtroom felt thick with their lies. He had painted a compelling portrait of a frail, elderly woman spiraling out of control, besieged by predators, with a loving family desperately trying to save her. I looked at the judge, an older woman with a stern, unreadable expression. I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I felt a knot of pure terror tighten in my stomach. They were so convincing. What if she believed them? What if this was it? I glanced at Mr. Vance. A small, triumphant smile played on his lips. He thought he had one. He had no idea what Mr. Davies had waiting for him. The petitioner rests, Your Honor, Mr. Vance said, sitting down with an air of finality. Mr. Davies, the judge said, turning to us. Your witness. Thank you, Your Honor, Mr. Davies said, standing up. The defense calls Mr. Howard Green to the stand. My pharmacist, a kind man in his late 60s, walked nervously to the witness box. Mr. Vance looked momentarily confused. This wasn't a witness on their list. Mr. Davies approached him gently. Mr. Green, you signed a statement for Mrs. Brittany Anderson regarding my client's medication habits, did you not? I did, Mr. Green said, his voice quiet. But she misled me. A murmur went through the courtroom. Please explain to the court what happened, Mr. Davies prompted. Brittany came into the pharmacy in a panic, Mr. Green explained. She said she was worried her mother-in-law wasn't taking her prescriptions and asked me to sign a statement confirming that Mrs. Anderson's purchases were irregular. I told her that was true, because Mrs. Anderson doesn't have any regular prescriptions. She only buys vitamins and the occasional aspirin. Brittany told me the statement was for insurance purposes. I had no idea it would be used in a lawsuit to suggest she was mentally unwell. It was a trick. Mr. Vance's confident expression faltered. Point one to our side. Next, the defense calls Dr. Amanda Moore, Mr. Davies announced. A sharp, professional woman in her 50s took the stand. She was a respected geriatric psychiatrist. "Dr. Moore," Mr. Davies said, "you conducted a full 4-hour cognitive and psychological evaluation of my client, Mrs. Carol Anderson, 2 weeks ago. Can you please tell the court your findings?" "Certainly," Dr. Moore said, opening a file. "I put Mrs. Anderson through a battery of standardized tests assessing memory, executive function, reasoning, and financial literacy. In every single category, she scored not just in the normal range for her age, but significantly above average. Her cognitive function is excellent. There is absolutely no clinical evidence of dementia, cognitive impairment, or any psychiatric condition that would affect her ability to manage her own affairs." She looked directly at the judge. "In my professional opinion, Mrs. Anderson is one of the sharpest, most competent 71-year-olds I have ever evaluated." The judge was now looking at Kevin and Brittany, her expression hardening. Mr. Davies wasn't done. He called Susan and then Mrs. Gable. They testified calmly and clearly about my active social life, my clarity of mind, and the vicious slander campaign Brittany had waged against me at the community center. They painted a picture not of a recluse, but of a vibrant woman reclaiming her life. Then it was my turn. My legs felt like jelly as I walked to the witness stand, but I held my head high. I sat down and looked out, not at Kevin or Brittany, but at the judge. Mr. Davies led me through my story. He had me tell the court about the secret wedding, about the $82,000. I recounted the ambush in my dining room, the shredded power of attorney, the terrifying visit from animal control, the intimidation by adult protective services. With each detail, I could feel the narrative in the room shifting. The story of the confused old woman was being replaced by the story of a woman who had endured years of systematic abuse. On cross-examination, Mr. Vance tried to rattle me. "Mrs. Anderson," he said in a silky voice, "isn't it true that you have become angry and bitter? That you are punishing your son for marrying a woman you don't approve of?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I am not angry that my son got married," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I am hurt that my son and his wife treated me like a financial transaction. I am not punishing them. I am protecting myself. There is a difference." He tried to portray my friendships with Susan and the others as a sign of manipulation. "Isn't it true that these new friends have been advising you on financial and legal matters you don't understand?" "My friends have been advising me on something I had clearly forgotten," I retorted. "Self-respect. And that is something I understand perfectly well now." For his final question, he leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, after all your son has done for you over the years, you feel no love, no maternal obligation to help him in his time of need?" I took a deep breath. I looked over at Kevin, who for the first time met my gaze. His eyes were pleading. But it wasn't too late for an apology. It was too late for a different outcome. I turned back to the lawyer and then to the judge. I finally realized that my obligation was to honor the woman my husband loved, and the life he worked so hard to provide for me. What I was getting from my son and his wife was not love. It was a business arrangement where I paid all the expenses. And when I decided to close the business, they decided to sue me for the assets. I let the words hang in the air. I do not regret my decision. I only regret that it took me 36 months and $82,000 to finally make it. The courtroom was utterly silent. Mr. Vance sat down, defeated. He had no more questions. Mr. Davies gave his closing argument, summarizing the mountain of evidence that pointed not to my incompetence, but to their greed. He called their lawsuit what it was: the final desperate act of financial predators whose host had finally fought back. The judge, a woman named Eleanor Miller, listened to everything without expression. When the arguments were finished, she announced she would recess for 1 hour before delivering her verdict. It was the longest hour of my life. I sat with Susan and Mr. Davies in the courthouse cafeteria, unable to eat, just stirring a cup of coffee I had no intention of drinking. When we were called back into the courtroom, my heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. My entire future, my freedom, rested on the next few minutes. Judge Miller entered and took her seat. She looked over her notes and then she looked directly at Kevin and Brittany. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "I have reviewed all the testimony and evidence presented in this matter," she began, her voice ringing with authority. The petitioner requests that this court strip Mrs. Carol Anderson of her fundamental rights and place her under a conservatorship managed by her son. Such an action is one of the most drastic a court can take, and it requires overwhelming evidence that the individual is unable to care for herself or manage her own affairs. She paused and her gaze hardened. This court has not been presented with a shred of credible evidence to support that claim. On the contrary, the evidence shows that Mrs. Anderson is not only competent, but remarkably resilient, clear-headed, and articulate. I felt a sob of relief catch in my throat. Mr. Davies put a reassuring hand on my arm. The judge wasn't finished. She turned her full attention to my son and daughter-in-law. What the evidence does show, she continued, her voice rising with indignation, is a disturbing pattern of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and harassment on the part of the petitioners. This lawsuit is not an act of love or concern. It is a frivolous, malicious, and frankly disgusting attempt to seize control of an elderly parent's assets when she rightly decided to stop enabling your financially irresponsible lifestyle. Brittany gasped, her face turning pale. Kevin sank lower in his chair, his face crimson with shame. Therefore, Judge Miller declared, her voice booming through the courtroom, the petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the petitioners, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, to pay for all of Mrs. Carol Anderson's legal fees associated with this case. She banged her gavel, the sound cracking like a whip. This case is dismissed. It was over. I had won. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in months they were tears of joy, of pure, unadulterated relief. My friends hugged me. Mr. Davies shook my hand, a broad smile on his face. As we left the courtroom I saw them, Kevin and Brittany, huddled with their lawyer who looked furious. Brittany shot me a look of pure venomous hatred. But it didn't affect me anymore. She had no power over me. Then Kevin looked up. Our eyes met across the hallway. For a fleeting second, I saw the little boy I used to know. His eyes filled with a flicker of what might have been shame or regret. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the hollow emptiness I now recognized. It was too late. He had made his choice. I turned and walked away without looking back. That night my friends and I had a celebration at my house. We didn't toast to a victory. We toasted to a new beginning. In the months that followed, I took the judge's verdict to heart. I sold the large empty house that held too many painful memories and bought a beautiful light-filled condo downtown. I took a portion of the money I had saved from their clutches and donated it to an elder abuse charity Mr. Davies recommended. The rest? The rest was for me. I booked a trip to Italy, something Robert and I had always dreamed of doing. I signed up for a pottery class. I started volunteering at the local library. I never heard from Kevin or Brittany again. Through the grapevine, I heard they had to move out of their expensive apartment and that Brittany had to get a real job for the first time in her life. Maybe, just maybe, reality would teach them the lessons my love and money never could. Sometimes at night I sit on my new balcony, looking out at the city lights, and I think about the woman I was. The woman who thought her value was measured by how much she could give away. That woman is gone. In her place is a woman who understands that true love doesn't come with a price tag, and that your own peace of mind is the most valuable asset you will ever own. Thank you for listening to my story. I learned my lesson the hard way, but I came out stronger. I have to ask, what would you have done in my situation? Please, share your thoughts and any similar experiences you may have had in the comments below. Hearing from you helps us all feel a little less alone. And if my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more. You are not invisible, and your story matters.